Dear viewers, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to our program, The Roots. We are continuing with our root number 8. I introduced this root and I called it knowledge. We looked at the definition or the simple meaning of knowledge, which we said knowledge is familiarity, all awareness, all understanding of someone or something. We looked at an example of King Solomon and his achievements in the area of knowledge. He did not only receive knowledge from God, but also wisdom and understanding. And we learned that he was able to become what we read about him. We went on to the next video, the previous one, where we looked at what do you know? Many times we tend to think we know. Yes, we know. But the question was, what do we know? What do you know? And in simple terms, when I was teaching, I said, we know a lot. Which a lot, we either shouldn't know or we should know. In other words, we know a lot of what we should know, all what we shouldn't know, and we leave out what we ought to know. There is what we call a need to know basis or something. And in that previous video, I talked about many things like somebody knows somebody. You know somebody. In and out. Even how he sleeps, how he snores, how he didn't get enough supper. When you really don't live with that person, or you are not close to that person, that is how we know things. That is how we think we know. And I ended with a question: how do you benefit from knowing somebody from A to Z? How do you benefit from getting into somebody's affairs? Whether you know the truth about them or not, but you have to know them. I said sometimes what we think we know may not be what we have to know. And we leave out what we ought to know. So today, we have another question about the root knowledge. There are a lot of things that we ought to know. Surprisingly, we leave them out. And in looking for what we think we know, or getting deep into knowledge of what we shouldn't know, we get wasted, we waste time, we cause trouble, you become a burden to others, they become a burden to you. You live a very miserable life because you get concerned so much with what you shouldn't be concerned. Today, we are looking at a question: what do we ought to know? Kiki kye twanditeekeddwa okumanya ng'oggyeko ebyo byonna bye tulowooza nti tubimanyi ng'ate ebimu tetuteekeddwa na kubimanya. Ne tulekayo what we ought to know. So today we are looking at what we ought to know. When we read the Bible, in the book of Hosea, chapter 4, verse 6, it tells us, my people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Like I said, we take a lot of time on getting into what we want to know when we are not supposed to know them. And as a result, we tend to miss out what we would have known, that the end result is getting destroyed, getting wasted. That is from the book, the Holy Book. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. You may think you have knowledge, which knowledge does not help you in any way. Sometimes you may have it, yes, but it is just to destroy you, to ruin your life. Take an example of people who are influenced. Many times people are influenced. Let's think about our children in their youth stage. They have friends who tell them, let's do this. If he doesn't know how to do it, trust me, he will get somebody to train him to do it. Though not all of them. Peer influence. They even have a way of asking, do you know this? Do you know how to do this? Have you ever done it? Once he says no, come here, I'll show you how to do it. They are mentored, they are taught, they are trained. What are they trained? What information are they getting? Is it beneficial or ruining their lives? At the end of the day, you find them getting lost that way. Why? Because they didn't get the right knowledge, or what they sought to know was wrong. What do we ought to know? We ought to know the truth. We read about that in John chapter 8, verse 32. When you get to know the truth will set you free. We are bound because we don't know the truth. Truth is the actuality of what you think you know. You may say, I know Catherine. Yes, from your perspective, you know me. But you may not know me 100%. You don't have truth about me that you have to tell others. So in the Bible, we are encouraged to know the truth. And what is amazing, once we take what we know, we go on publishing, sharing with others. I tell you what, it's like this and this and this and this and this and this. Are you spreading the truth about me or somebody you are talking about? Is that knowledge you are spreading true, or you doubt it? First, get the truth in what you think you know. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. What do we ought to know? First and foremost, we ought to know that there is God, the supreme ruler of everything. In all your things, in all what you have to know, you should know that there is God. That is the truth. If you don't know that truth, you may mess up yourself. Having known that God we are talking about, in his superiority, he's supreme, he's all-knowing, he's all-loving, he knows everything, he sees everything, he understands everything, you inclusive. You ought to know that. You'll get freedom, because that is truth. Another thing you ought to know is that life that you have, life that I have, has a beginning and has an end. Life begins and life ends. So, in that, we should know that as life begins and ends, I and you, are not permanent in this life. That is the truth. You are here today, tomorrow you may be gone. Because life begins, life ends. Therefore, everything that you know in life, that you see, that you talk about, that you admire, that you are proud of, that you boast about, will one day come to an end. That is the truth. Life begins, life ends. Therefore, everything begins and ends, you inclusive. Another thing we ought to know is that we have to keep time. Why? Because in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the Bible, chapter 3, it talks about time. And it says, everything under heaven has time and season. There is time for everything. There is a season for every activity under the heaven. Having known that God is God, which is the truth, we ought to know that God is the supreme ruler of everything. He knows everything, he sees everything, he understands everything, he's all in all. And he controls you and me and everything. That is the truth. Another truth is that life begins and life ends. So whatever you think about, whatever you do, whatever you say, do it knowing that you are not permanent here on earth. That is the truth. Another thing you ought to know is that there is time for everything. There is season for every activity under the heaven. That is where we are. When I'm teaching this, I'm so much focused on you and me, human beings. As we seek knowledge, as we seek to know whatever concerns everybody, we should know that that will also end. Because there is time for that, and there is a season. It is so amazing seeing somebody when it is sowing season, that person getting ready to harvest. It's not so common, and I don't think it's normal. Time for sowing is for sowing. Time for harvesting is for harvesting. Many times we've been wasted due to lack of knowledge, as Hosea says. You've never bothered to know that time has to be taken seriously. When others are beginning the journey, for you, you are beginning to sleep. By the time you wake up, others will be at the end of the journey. Because you don't know much about time. We should be time conscious as human beings. Whatever stage you are, whatever age you are, do you know what time means? Do you take trouble to use your time appropriately? A girl is in teenage. She's acting like a woman who is in 30, 40, 50. A woman is in her 40s, 50s. She's acting like a girl who is in her teenage. Time and season for everything. You are a man over there. Do you take trouble to think about how much you know about time? Leave alone looking at your watch. Leave alone looking at your phone because it has time on it. Leave alone looking at the clock. Leave alone the natural way of telling it time. The sun is out, now it is morning. The sun is going down, now it's evening. But in yourself, within you, do you take a note of time? We have lived miserably because we don't watch time and season. There is time for falling in love. There is time for ending falling in love and you become married. There is time for being pregnant. There is time for producing children. There is a season for children to go to school. There is season for children to be out of school, having graduated, and they start looking for jobs. Time and season. That is truth. Many people, we've lived an incomplete life because we don't know time. We have complained, we have become burdens to others because we think life is permanent. Today you don't do what you are supposed to do so that you accomplish it because you wait for tomorrow. There is what we call postponism, procrastination. We tend to be in those things just because we think life is permanent. None of us will live forever. Today you are living, tomorrow you may be gone. But how have you kept time? How have you prepared for such things? Have you done what you ought to do within that time when you are still on earth? According to your age, according to your understanding, according to your maturity. If you don't, you become a burden to others. And you'll keep complaining about others. They don't want to help me. Now I want to do this. They don't help me. There is a time when you should not be helped. When you have to be independent. Another thing that we ought to know is that our God is generous. Our God is gracious. Our God is loving. He's merciful. We ought to know that God wants us to be generous. God wants us to relate with others, because that's why he created us and put us in the same world. But when I think of the word being mean, you ought to know that you don't have to be mean to others. Don't be mean to yourself. That is very important. There are many of us who have not only been mean to others, but to themselves also. If you are mean to yourself, I don't know how you'll end. You'll still live complaining. Take an example of seeing your friend, whom you call your best friend, wearing a new shirt. Straight away you become envious about him wearing a new shirt. Then that one is followed by a lot of questions. You bought a shirt. Where did you buy it? How much did you buy it? Now why do you spend a lot of money? It seems you are wasting. You start bringing out information about how much you know as far as that situation is concerned. You think you know. But what makes you do all of that? Because you are mean to yourself. And the way you feel about yourself is the way you think others should feel about themselves. We labor. The Bible calls it toiling. All day, all night. That is the life of a human being. But what do you gain out of that labor? You work to get money, and for sure you are given money where you work. You cannot buy yourself a shoe, you cannot buy yourself good food, you cannot buy yourself a good dress, you cannot take yourself for medical checkup, you cannot even buy anything that will make you look good. You are being mean. You ought to know that being mean is ungodly. If our God was mean, he wouldn't have given us his only son to die on the cross for us. If our God was mean, he wouldn't be giving us his word, which contains a lot for us to have life. Another thing we ought to know, you are yourself. You are yourself. I am myself. You remember we began by looking at myself. Do you know yourself? Do I know myself? Once you get to know that you are yourself, you should know your beginning, the middle of your journey, and your destiny. You should watch it. You should work hard to be an achiever within the course of that journey. Being yourself, watch the way you decide on certain things in your life. Being yourself, watch the choices you make, because they lead to your destiny. Some of us think we know. Like I said in the beginning, we know. But what do we know? We think we know when we don't know what we have to know. And we walk in that mess of thinking we know and leave out what we ought to know. If you get to know that you are yourself, you'll put things right, in your life. And don't become a burden to somebody else. We have many examples in this area. You may be in a class, you're a student. You don't pay attention when they are teaching. You don't keep time for class, you come late. You keep on getting out every now and then. There are certain things you are required to have while in class, books, pens, and everything. You've never had anything the way it should be. You are in the groups of children or students who are unruly. It's not about others. It's you, yourself. When you get to know that you are yourself, and whatever you do, it's you who does it, it will give you freedom, and you stop blaming others for your messes. That is another truth. Why am I calling them the truth? I said, we read in John chapter 8 verse 32, you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. If we don't know the truth, we will always think what we know is what we ought to know, which is wrong. Another example is of somebody who is ever arguing about everything when he doesn't know. We have many people of that character. Somebody starts or brings an idea, straight away another person says, no, that will not work. It doesn't work that way. Okay, if it doesn't work that way, how does it work? You should know. He or she dodges it. But the reality is, she or he doesn't know. And he or she doesn't seek to know. The truth is, you don't know. You should seek to know. And when you get to know, try to help others also to know. Don't boast over others. Another thing we ought to know is that you are your own friend or enemy. You are your own friend or enemy. Remember in the previous teaching I talked about, those people you know are your friends may not be your friends. But they are just there in that umbrella, friends. Not until you have got to know them in depth will you realize who true friends are, or who untrue friends are. You ought to know that you are your own friend or enemy. When I look at you, I regard you as my friend, but at the end of it, in your place, I should put myself. Whatever you expect from your friend, he's my friend. I expected him to do this for me. No, it takes us back to independency. I've been thinking this girl is my friend because all that time we've been together, we've done this and that and that. No, don't complain. Just go back to yourself and say, okay, now I've come to realize that I am my own friend. So how do I go about this? There is a saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed. How many of those people have you known as your friends, have been there for you in need, and have become friends indeed, except yourself? You are your own friend, you are your own enemy. If anything gets messed up in your life, you have caused it. If anything has gone right in your life, you have caused it. So choose either to be your own enemy or to be your own friend, so that you don't have to blame others for your messes, for your failures. People have lived life which is incomplete because have not known the truth. People have been destroyed, according to Hosea, because they lack knowledge. We said knowledge is, let me get it for you. You'll excuse me. Knowledge is familiarity. When you are familiar with something, it doesn't end outside. I'm familiar with this book. Yes, you are. But do you know what is in the book? When you are reading a book, you can get to know what it is about when you get it and look at the cover page, the back cover. It summarizes what is in the book. Therefore, when you get some little information from there, it doesn't mean you have read the book. If I happen to ask you, are you reading that book? Oh no, I'm not reading it, but I know it. What do you know about it? Trust me, you'll give me the information you got from the back cover. But that's not all what it is. If you want to know that book, get into the book page by page. You'll get more about it. If you want to know me, if you want to know a person, relate with that person. Don't just get to know what is outside that person, but the more I relate with that person, get to know more and more. In a positive way, by the way. The way we do it tends to be wrong, because whenever we are together, we are so critical. We just pick out the negative of somebody we are with. Try to get a paper in a day when you are with somebody, and at least note, we have phones, not the good you have found in somebody. Because you ought to know somebody who you relate with. You ought to know somebody who you call your friend. You ought to know your father, your mother. Parents, we ought to know our children. Don't let outsiders tell you about your children. Somebody comes and tells you, oh, you have a very good boy. He does this and this. And the way you look at that person telling you, facial expression can show that person you don't know your child. Parents, let's get to know our children. I want you to get me correct. It's God who searches the heart. You may not know somebody 100%, but at least if you are together interacting with that person, you can at least get to know that person to a certain percentage. We have seen many people getting married within just a few weeks or months. They are split. Why? I didn't know he would be like that. You may not have known him fully, but at least in those days which you spend, like we are dating, we are in courtship, we are going to this, and we are doing, get to know that person as he also gets to know you. That is being familiar or getting familiar with something, being aware of somebody, how he behaves, how he talks. Do you know how people talk? Do you know how people behave? Do you know people's temper? You may find me smiling all the time. I'm ever smiling. When you don't know my temper, the day you'll see my other color, you'll say, oh my goodness, I didn't know she's like this. Those are some of the things we ought to know. How do you get information? What you get to know is information about somebody or about something. There are many ways we get to know things. Maybe in our next video, we shall look at sources of information. Sources of what we ought to know. Do you think when you are seeking to know something, you get it from the right source? You want to know me. You want to know Catherine. Where would you go to get information about me? Do you have to go to people I live with on the village? Do you have to go to my church? Do you have to go to the school where I went? Do you have to ask my husband? Do you have to ask my children? Do you have to go in books? Do you have to check in the Bible? What are the sources of what we ought to know? There are some other things we ought to know. Have you ever bothered or taken trouble to know some people who are gifted in certain areas? All you think you know everything. When your television gets kind of fault or damaged, has a problem, it's good you can repair it because everybody is gifted. But there's a moment when you get somewhere where you need a technician. Do you know that? There is a moment when you will need somebody technical to help you out in certain areas. There's a moment when we need people with the skills. When we are in the house, I don't think my husband can beat me in cooking food. I am a skilled cook. Being a woman, being a wife. But if my husband continues to think he knows, he will sometimes mess up things. It's better he comes to realize that he doesn't know certain things and he needs my help. I also have to do the same. There is somewhere where I'll need him, having realized that I don't know everything, and when he comes in, things are easy. Thank you for tuning in. We meet next time. Don't forget to share. The past 2 weeks, we didn't have videos on YouTube. That was kind of problem, but they are already posted, and this one is also going to be posted. May God bless you. We meet next time.